This is the Lord of the Rings Saruman, one of the biggest movie villains ever.
The scene is one of the most important scenes in the whole trilogy. Final confrontation between the Fellowship and their greatest enemy.
Saruman, your staff is broken.
Not only is it among the most classic villain deaths in cinema, it's also a meaningful closure to the character's arc and includes a crucial plot detail.
We were all shown the films in private, and I couldn't believe what I saw.
And yet, the scene
because I wasn't in it.
Was cut from the movie, which begs the question, why?
What happened to Saruman?
Cutting his character out caused Christopher Lee bitter resentment toward the man who did the cutting, Peter Jackson, resulting in a nearly 3-year-long falling out where he refused to even talk to him. But to understand why Lee was so upset, we have to go back to the release of the Lord of the Rings books.
I read these books when they came out, and I was absolutely enthralled. I thought it was the greatest work of literature I'd ever read in my life.
If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, your level of obsession likely doesn't hold a candle to Christopher Lee's.
I read The Lord of the Rings every year.
And his connection to the series had something special that none of the other actors had.
He actually met Professor Tolkien once.
Yes, I was sitting in a pub in Oxford with some friends. This was in the middle or late 50s, I think. He used to go there all the time to meet C.S. Lewis, who is behind Narnia, of course. We were sitting having a beer, and I suddenly saw this figure come in, and I said, my God, there's the professor. And one of the people with us said, I'll try and get him to come over and say, how do you do? And he did. He came over and said, how do you do? And I said, how do you do, sir? And I thought, now, should I kneel? Or I was completely overcome.
But meeting Tolkien was one echelon shy of Lee's ultimate dream, which started when he first picked up the books.
When you read something like that, you have this dream. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful? And even more wonderful when I was in it.
In 1997, the first part of that dream came true. The film was set to be made, and after 50 successful years as an actor, he landed a meeting with the creators to discuss his dream role.
Of course, when I read it, I thought, oh, Gandalf, my God.
The problem was that Lee's success on screen was as a villain, earning somewhat of a typecast over the years. So when Lee brought up his deep Tolkien connections and dreams of playing Gandalf, it was a bit awkward.
Christopher was someone that we had in mind for Saruman. He says, but did you ever consider me for Gandalf? Which we hadn't done, and it put us on the spot a bit. He actually auditioned for us, which is the last thing we wanted Christopher Lee to audition for us for the role of Gandalf. What we actually ended up realizing is that we had other possibilities for Gandalf.
You shall not pass!
The problem wasn't that Lee wasn't suited to play Gandalf. It was that he was so good at playing the villain, he left Jackson no other option.
But there is no other actor we thought of that could do Saruman. I mean, Christopher was our only choice, not just because of his background and because I had grown up, loving Christopher Lee's movies. You'd be hard-pressed to find another actor that would be better at bringing Saruman to life.
We have work to do.
One of the great things about Christopher Lee, too, is that he is probably one of the biggest Tolkien fans I've ever met, so I never had to really talk to him about who and what Saruman was. He just absolutely knows his character inside out.
But Lee's love of Tolkien's work would actually go on to cause more tension.
He had a very acute jealousy of Sean Connery. Early on in Lord of the Rings, Sean Connery was the first choice for Gandalf. I always wonder if there's a little bit in the back of his mind of this was the moment where he might have been able to trounce Sean Connery.
He was spitting blood when Sean Connery accepted a knighthood, several years before he got one.
Whatever the emotion or reaction, you have to credit Lee with the fact that it all came from a sincere passion for the role.
I want to create an indisputable masterpiece.
It's vitally essential whenever you play a character which may be unreal and improbable and strange and fantastic and weird, that you should play it absolutely seriously, otherwise there is no conviction whatsoever.
His earnestness would actually cause him to challenge Jackson during the filming of Saruman's death scene.
Of course, it was my job as director to talk to Christopher Lee and to explain to him what I wanted. So I started to go into this long explanation about what sort of sound he should make when he got stabbed.
I did say to Peter, have you any idea what kind of noise happens when somebody's stabbed in the back? Because I do.
It's not. I like that.
It's because the breath's driven out of your body.
He proceeded to sort of talk about some very clandestine part of World War II. He seemed to have expert knowledge of exactly the sort of noise that they make, and so I just sort of didn't push the subject any further. I just said, well, you obviously know what to do, Christopher, so...
The scene is one of the most important scenes in the whole trilogy. Final confrontation between the Fellowship and their greatest enemy.
Challenging Jackson did boost the authenticity of the scene, but in the end, it was Jackson who would have control over it in a way Lee could never have imagined. But to understand the feud that would ensue, we have to look at the context of the scene itself. It was originally filmed for the Two Towers, which Jackson described as the most difficult because it doesn't have a beginning and doesn't have an end.
We certainly cut it at a pretty quick pace, which is one of the reasons why I think that 3 hours people enjoy it, because most people come out of it saying it didn't feel like 3 hours.
Saruman's death scene, on the other hand,
it's a long sequence.
So Jackson decided that the Two Towers couldn't sustain a 7-minute wrap after Helm's Deep, and that it would be a good idea to save it for the Return of the King. The trouble is, according to Jackson, when we viewed various Return of the King cuts over the last few weeks, it feels like the first scenes are wrapping up last year's movie instead of starting the new one. So instead of giving closure to the villain of the first two movies, or setting up important context for the third, the theatrical cut of Return of the King cut all of that out. Even this. Instead, the movie picked up right here.
The filth of Saruman is washing away.
Leaving viewers wondering what Treebeard was talking about, or how the Orthanc stone got in the water.
I wasn't in it. Saruman, the most evil of them all, against the Fellowship. It wasn't in the film.
Somehow, news of the cut leaked before the movie even premiered, which, to put it lightly, caused an outrage.
Nobody could understand this. There were millions of hits on the internet, not just from Tolkien fans and the film fans, but everybody. Because they said, what happened to Saruman?
Fans naturally love Peter Jackson, and never thought it was him who cut the scene. Instead, they speculated that the studio was to blame. But on November 3rd, 2003, Jackson cleared the air in a published email conversation. Jackson admitted that he believed most people will assume Saruman was vanquished by the Helm's Deep events and Ent attack, clarifying that this was done by us. There were no studio cutting notes. This didn't make fans any happier, as they would only amplify their complaints online. Ian McKellen said he couldn't imagine that a man who has made as many movies as Christopher is surprised that what you've shot doesn't make it into the final movie.
I couldn't believe what I saw.
Lee said he was completely shocked and still doesn't know why his scene was cut. Jackson downplayed Lee's outrage, saying, "Everything I've read on the internet is completely wrong, and that it was always his intention to save the Saruman sequence for the DVD. He insisted that there were phone calls and faxes between him and Lee and that the actor was fine. But Lee wasn't fine." At the Return of the King premiere, Lee was a no-show. He said publicly, "What's the point of going? None at all." Dedicated fan Matt Schuster quickly came to Lee's defense, starting a petition asking Peter Jackson to at least consider putting this scene back into the theatrical version. It got over 40,000 signatures. Jackson was not happy, saying that the petition was not necessarily in Lee's best interest and brings a lot of unnecessary publicity to it. Eventually, Schuster agreed, clarifying that signing the petition now will only serve to breed ill will among the filmmakers, and that was not my intent. But cutting the scene had already bred enough ill will on its own. After he ditched the world premiere, Viggo Mortensen convinced Lee to attend the Copenhagen premiere. In 2006, Lee recounted, "I went and there was Peter. He came up to me and he said he wanted to give me a big hug. We sat next to each other and he told me where my scenes would be inserted into the extended DVD. I told him, sarcastically, that that was good news. I haven't seen him since." Jackson and Lee's falling out went on for almost 3 years, until they were forced back together.
I'm going on an adventure!
Jackson wanted Lee to return for the Hobbit trilogy, but Lee thought their amends came too late, saying, "I'm too old now. The trip is just too long. It's such a tremendous journey." But Jackson knew Lee wouldn't be able to resist the material.
I think as a Tolkien scholar and someone that cares deeply about these books, I think he was just very happy to be able to at least portray Saruman before he fell into darkness. It allowed him to complete that cycle with the character.
So they found a workaround, with Lee shooting his scenes off location.
It's great, and really give it all you've got.
Fall over if I do that.
And even in his 90s, Lee gave the character everything he had.
I said, well, that's fantastic. That's absolutely wonderful. He's Saruman the White, the noble, the decent. He's fighting on the side of the angels.
And as far as Lee and Jackson making amends, ahead of the release of An Unexpected Journey, Jackson said, "I did talk to Christopher the other day about coming to the premiere, and he did say, 'Am I still in the movie?' And this time around, I could say yes." But Lee would add one last note to his legacy.
We all know that Lord of the Rings was one of the most important things in his entire life. What we don't know is that Lord of the Rings played a significant part in his death.
And Christopher Lee was the best. The veteran British actor has died at the age of 93.
Before passing peacefully of heart failure, Lee spent his final night watching The Lord of the Rings, so he could tell the nurses looking after him how the film was made, even in his final hours. The series was in his heart and mind. His life and career shows that whatever you do,
embrace your own destruction.
If you do it with integrity.
I don't play villains, I play people.
To receive the honor of knighthood, Sir Christopher Lee.
That can be your legacy. I'm Adam. This is ScreenPuff. If you enjoyed watching this, check out this next video. And as always, thank you for watching.